Hi, this is Lance here. This is a continuation to my introduction HTML video. This will dive more into HTML styling. Um, if you need basic HTML, a basic HTML tutorial, you can go back to my original HTML tutorial, which goes into the basic tags and how to set up HTML. I will add that in the description below this video. So today we'll talk about HTML styling specifically. There's a couple attributes of that. One thing to note is HTML styling uses a language called CSS. We'll kind of explain to you what that is and how that works. We'll go over inline styles, so actually putting styles directly on tags within your HTML. Then we'll look at CSS style sheets, which talk about how to actually have those styles on a whole separate area in HTML code, or even a separate file, and to access those and to have access to those by your HTML elements. And we'll also go over some helpful browser tools. So what exactly is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and essentially it's a way to extract styling from HTML and have it in a separate file for reference. The cool thing about CSS is that you don't need to put a style in each individual element. You can actually style all H1s with one style, all Ps with one style, paragraphs, all images in one style. If you want to change the width and height and have a central width and height for all your images, you can do that through a style sheet. So the first thing we'll go through is how to write a style inline, just to understand it and get the syntax. As you can see here, this is actually what we created in the first tutorial as an HTML page to start, which has paragraphs, headers, images, and a link as well. So we'll actually use this for our basic styling. So we'll go ahead and change this. All style is an attribute. So as we said before, BG color being an attribute, or source being an attribute for an image, or href being an attribute for A, we just have a separate optional attribute that you could use on basically any tag that has a body, and it's called style. So let's go ahead and change this. So we set this as an attribute here as light blue, but let's use CSS syntax to show you how it works. So go ahead and wipe this out, and the style attribute is called style, as you would expect, right? So then you have to go ahead and use what they call CSS syntax. So what you have is a selector and an attribute. So basically you would have a body style of background color, and you use a colon to separate out the and then to separate out the actual attribute of the style, and we can add a value. So the value would be, and with CSS you can also use literal text instead of just an HTML color code. So I'm going to type in light blue, just like that. So let's go ahead and save this and see what our web page looks like. Alright, so I'll render this. As you can see here, the background is light blue, just as you'd expect. So that's all done by that CSS inline style we added. So there's a lot more you can do with CSS. You can reference online. There's plenty of CSS tags, and there's plenty of CSS values you can use. You can do lots of stuff, not just background color. You can do font color. You can do font size, font weight, things like that. So let's go ahead and try a couple of those. Let's go ahead and change our paragraph, and let's add a style. Let's make it equal to, just like we did before with the body, and we're going to go ahead and add a color. So when you define a text color, it's actually referenced just as color, like this. And then the value would be, let's do red, just like that. And what I messed up here is you always want to add a semicolon. It's optional here, but it won't be optional. If you want to add more than one, you always have to have the semicolon. So say I do colors red, I do font weight bold. Semicolon would be needed there to decipher between the two. So let's go ahead and copy this and add a style to our second paragraph as well. But let's call this blue. Let's do font decoration. And these are all items you can look up. There's lots of CSS you can look up, and I'll also reference you back to this W3 school site. This has a great CSS reference and tutorial you can look at to learn a lot of different tags and things you can do with CSS. It's a great tool. I'll go ahead and fix a typo I made here. It's actually text decoration for this. This gets kind of confusing when you start learning CSS and looking into it. You'll see a lot of features with font and text. So for example, if you want to make font bold, you do font weight. If you want to do underline, you do text. So text and font, you'll have to look into that there. Those two can be pretty confusing, but there's always references online to look at. So we'll go ahead and save this and we'll render the page. So I'm going to go ahead and render my website. As you can see here, the top one is bold and red, and the bottom one is underlined in blue. So we'll go ahead and go back to the code. And say I want all the paragraphs have a similar style. I don't want to have to write, say I could have 500 paragraphs, you know, in one web page or one website, for example, and I don't want to have to go through each paragraph tag and write in the style and copy it over and over and over again. It's error prone and very tedious. So what we can do is we can actually create a style CSS, and we could actually do that directly on the page here. So I'll show you how to do that, and this is where the head tag comes into play. So what you do here is you go ahead and create a new tag and call it style, just like this. And of course, with an opening tag, you always have to close it. So I want all my paragraphs to be blue and bold. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead, and what the style does is it determines, it creates CSS for you. So it knows whatever's in the style tag, it renders it as CSS. So CSS is very simple. It's exactly like we did down here with the style tag. All you literally would do is copy this, paste in here, and then CSS generally starts with an opening bracket like this and a closing bracket like this, and right in front of it you put the attribute you want to style. So in our case it's a paragraph, so it looks just like this: P, opening bracket, closing bracket, within we have our CSS. And generally CSS syntax, you just stack the different attributes you want to style on top of one another like this. So as I mentioned, I want the color to be blue and the font weight to be bold. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and remove these. What will happen if you leave these in is these will actually override what's defined up here. Whatever is in here always takes precedence. If you put a style attribute, it'll always take precedence over a style CSS. So in here you want to go ahead and just get this back just like this. Okay, so now all the P's should be, all the paragraphs should be blue and font weight bold. Let's check it out. As you can see here, that has been done. So it's a very easy way to standardize tags and their styling, so you don't have to do it over and over and over and over again. And you can do this with paragraphs, headers, you can do it with divs, anything you want, even images. But say I want two different styles on paragraphs. I don't want just one style, I want two different styles. So some paragraphs will have one style, some paragraphs will have another style. You can actually add what they call classes, styling classes to an attribute. So let's go ahead and try that here. Okay, so now we have 4 paragraphs. Let's say I want the top 2 to be red and bold and the bottom 2 to be blue and underlined. So here's how I do it. You have to do a dot, which signifies a class, and give it a name. So I'd call it red bold. And I do uppercase, and the second word is called camel case. And that's typical with coding practices. If you put 2 words together in what they call a variable or a class or anything like that, you always want the second word to be uppercase. So we're going to do this. I forgot what I mentioned before, so we'll just do this red and bold, and the bottom line we'll do blue and underlined. So we'll go ahead and do this and copy this guy, and we'll do blue underline. There we go. Okay, now we're going to change this to be blue, and like I mentioned, font and text. It's easy to mix those up. So we'll do text decoration. Do that to be underline. Okay, so now we want to add these. So what you do is down here on your paragraphs, I want these top 2 paragraphs to reference that. Well, how do I do that? You have to actually define it as another attribute. So there's an attribute called class. And this is a way to apply styles and all sorts of things, but we'll keep it simple and we'll just use a class for styling today. So we'll do class equals, just like before, and you're going to do, and you leave out the dot, you just put in red bold just like that. You do not apply the dot. The dot up here, CSS needs that to know it's a class. Down here we already know it because we define it as a class. So I'm going to go ahead and do, and you know what, I'm going to go ahead and add these and change them. And down here, I want these last 2 to be blue underlined. So I'll go ahead and copy this. Save that. And what we should see is an output with the top 2 paragraphs being red and bold, the bottom 2 being blue and underlined. Right, and I realize I made a small typo here. We actually take these out. We want these to be general classes. So if you leave it like this, these classes can be used with any tag. But the color and text refer to text, so it generally has to be any element that has text within it. In our case, we have a paragraph which has text within it, so we'll use red, bold, and blue underlined for paragraphs only here. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we will go ahead and render that just like that. So as you can see, the top 2 are red and bold, the bottom 2 are blue and underlined. The last thing I want to go over in this basic tutorial of CSS is debug tools. Most browsers have them. As a matter of fact, 99% of the browsers have them. My favorite one happens to be Chrome. You can use Chrome with usually any OS. You can use a Windows or Mac, and I highly recommend Chrome because if you're going to develop HTML, CSS, it has great debug tools. And what we want to use them for today is to be able to look and see exactly what where our code lies and how we render code on an HTML page. It's super helpful for any developer to know how to use these tools. It's a good way to debug as well as a good way to test out styling and things like that in the actual debugger tools. So what you want to do is inside the browser you just hit F12 and these tools come up. So the one we'll be looking at today are elements, and this is your entire HTML page. So all the code we wrote actually shows up here. You can see it in the header, you can see the style we wrote, everything you want. It's all right here in the browser for you to look through. So the really cool thing about CSS is generally if you highlight a element, it'll show the style that's applied to it. So you can see red bold here, and you can see the color here. So you could actually take it out if you want to, the color, you can take out the font weight, or you could even change it. And mind you, this of course only stays in the browser. This won't actually go to your code. This is just real-time testing. We could add other attributes to this. We could make these bottom ones bold if we wanted to. So I could do underline, and I could add font usually pre-fills for you. And I'll just do bold, just like that. Yep. It'll do that if you made a typo, and I did. So you go bold, just like that. There you go. So now you can see it's all bold. So it's a very powerful tool. You could even do stuff like changing text. So testing, and I'll change it in a web browser. So this is a really good way to test out your page. You could write code to bring it up here to debug and things like that, and change it all up and see what different effects have. This concludes our basic tutorial of CSS and how it works. There's still a lot to learn in the way of CSS. There's a lot of cool selectors and tags you could use with it. You can also go and reference these on w3schools.com, which I mentioned in other videos. I'll put that down the link below. It's an app. It's a free website, free resource to learn all you want to know about HTML, CSS. I highly recommend it. That's what I started with when I was learning years ago, and I still even reference it today for different things. So I recommend you go to that site if you want to learn more. And I will follow up with this video with other videos that are more advanced topics with HTML and CSS. I also want to mention that I have a website, small website, that has some good resources for learning, as well as services for website design, things like that. So recommend you visit that if you have time. I will also put this information in the description below. If you like this video, please hit the red subscribe button below. See you next time.